So on the topic of funerals and burial in the time of COVID, Anita, in your book, you note that, I'm quoting, the notion of a private funeral with only immediate family in attendance runs counter to Jewish sensibilities, not only because it deprives the mourners of human contact and comfort, but also because it deprives friends, colleagues, neighbors, and acquaintances of the opportunity to grieve and to show respect. Well, today we're in the time of coronavirus. People have no choice but to have private funerals. Do you think that other than the reason of safety, is there an advantage to having a private funeral? What's been your experience with that?
I think that's a matter of choice. I mean, if I was going to write that sentence again, I would say traditional, that offends traditional sensibilities, because some families are tiny, for one thing, and don't have a large circle of friends, and that would be, that wouldn't work for them. But there is a sense, I do believe that people need, and Judaism believes you need people around you at a time of loss. But we have to make do, and what's more important than anything is health and saving a life. So these tiny cemetery burials where there's just maybe 3 or 4 or 6, I have friends who've lost parents in particular, and there were 6 people at the cemetery, and that was hard. And one of my friends couldn't go to California to be there. So it's our reality now. And I think this is a time when clergy is really important to help comfort people, and others who've been through these kinds of COVID funerals can offer support to other folks as well. So hopefully, again, this will be a distant memory at some point soon. But for now, I think everybody needs to be very careful of each other and loving with one another. That's the funeral in particular.
Yeah, and alternatively, not only the small burial, the graveside funeral, but the Zoom funerals.
Right. Yes.
Sure. Have you had experience with those, and your impressions of how that is for the family? How does it serve them?
I haven't been to a Zoom funeral. I've been to a Zoom Shiva, but I have been present. Actually, I was at a funeral. I'm sorry. This is way before COVID. I was at a funeral where one of the family members was in Israel, and there was a camera in the back of the auditorium. And at first I sort of was taken aback and thought, well, why? And then I was explained how important it was for this family member who couldn't be there to be present. And I think that's been true for bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs where family are ill and far away, and having a camera there gives them the opportunity to, in real time, be present. And I think that's a blessing, actually.
Rabbi Robin, can you share a little bit about your own experiences that you've had with funerals and burials, and how they've been affected by our experience with COVID? What's the same and what's different?
So certainly what's different, as Anita mentioned, is the size and the number of people. I once did a funeral with 3 people present. And for me, the hardest part, and I imagine this is true for the mourners as well, and I said this right afterwards to the family, I can't hug you. I was just here with you for your loved one's funeral, and I feel a connection to you. And we've lost human touch. And I think that's the hardest thing for me and for many people about this whole experience with coronavirus and interacting with people when we are able to be in the same space as them, is that we can't physically touch them. I find that very difficult at funerals for me. But as far as the, kind of the Zoom funeral and the small funerals, I've officiated a number of smaller funerals that are just immediate family, and immediate family has ranged anywhere from 3 to 25, based on the size of the families. They've typically, we no longer do it at the funeral home. We tend to do it outside, which, as Anita mentioned earlier in a different segment, is sometimes people are buried and the whole funeral takes place at, that's not something new for the whole funeral to take place graveside, but that is very, very common now in the time of COVID. And I think what's different is before, sometimes when a funeral was maybe videotaped for someone, they didn't have the interaction, they just watched it. Where now I've had a grandchild from another city be able to say something and be able to share. So even people on Zoom are sometimes interact, certainly in Shiva, but even at the funeral as well, are able to interact with those present. The sad thing being often that grandchild could have flown in a different time. Now they can't, although that's not always the case. So I would say it's a challenge to be with such a small group of people, just the immediate family usually. Thank goodness we do have the technology, if the family wants it, to include a larger group of people to at least be present virtually. But I think it's really hard. And, you know, I work with a lot of wedding couples, and this is a really challenging time for them, and dates changing, and who can be at the wedding changing, and what the wedding looked like changing. But the wedding, you have some control over the date. With a death or a birth is the other example, you have no control. And to be so isolated often from really good friends and other people that are meaningful in your life is incredibly challenging. And not to be able to have them there for the funeral and or the burial is very, very difficult for people. And you know, it's weird to be standing in a mask at your loved one's graveside, and that with the shovels, you know, there's at least in Philadelphia, instead of using a shovel, you just use your hand to place the earth on the grave, which is one of our traditions. So I think that the funeral industry, the professionals have done a wonderful job in making it so that we can do as much as possible to make things feel normal. But unfortunately, this horrible pandemic has taken us so far from normalcy. And of all times when we lose a loved one, that can be incredibly challenging.
Yes. With the new normal, very painful new normal.